My son looked me dead in the eye at the dinner table and told me I wasn't classy enough to attend his wedding. Just let me enjoy my big day. So I didn't go. That evening, every news channel was replaying the moment the bride slapped him right in front of hundreds of guests. I quietly took a sip of my tea and smiled. I knew exactly what had happened, and I had known long before it even occurred. You're watching Dad's Revenge Stories, and I'm grateful that you chose to spend your time here. Before we begin, leave a comment telling me your country or city. I'd love to know where this story reaches you from. Also, please remember, this story includes fictional details created for entertainment and learning. Any similarity to names or places is purely coincidental, but the lesson is valuable. The carburetor was the problem. It always was. I had pulled the old Craftsman mower apart 3 times that week, spreading the pieces across my workbench like a jigsaw puzzle I already knew how to solve. The garage smelled the way it always did, motor oil, sawdust, and something faintly metallic that I could never quite identify, but had long stopped trying to. I wiped my hands on the rag hanging from my belt loop and held the carburetor up toward the single bulb swinging overhead. 41 years of working with my hands had taught me one thing above everything else. Most broken things aren't actually broken. They're just dirty, clogged, neglected. You clean them out, put them back together the right way, and 9 times out of 10, they run just fine. I wished people were that simple. My name is Walter Grayson. I am 63 years old, and I live alone in a 2-bedroom house on Clover Street in Denton, Ohio, a town small enough that the hardware store still knows your name, but large enough that you can go a whole week without running into someone you know if you're careful about it. The house isn't much to look at from the outside. The gutters need painting, the front porch has a board that gives a little too much when you step on it, and the rose bushes along the fence have gotten wilder than Margaret, my late wife, would have ever allowed. But the inside is clean, the roof holds, and the garage has everything I need. I had been out here since 6 that morning. Old habit. When you spend 30 years opening a machine shop, at 6:30 sharp, your body stops asking permission to wake up early. I retired 4 years ago, sold the business quietly to a younger man named Paul, who had good instincts and better patience than me, and settled into a life that most people would call simple. I called it honest. I was threading a new fuel line through the mower's housing when I heard the side gate creak. "So Walter Grayson, it is barely 8 o'clock in the morning, and you are already covered in grease." Dorothy Simmons appeared in the garage doorway, the way she always did, unannounced and carrying something. Today it was a loaf of banana bread, wrapped in a kitchen towel, still warm enough that I could smell the brown sugar from across the room. Dorothy was 70 years old, a widow of 11 years, and she had lived next door since before Ethan was born. She was the kind of neighbor that younger generations have stopped believing in, the kind who notices when your lights are off too early and shows up with food before you think to ask for it. "Morning, Dorothy." I set the carburetor down and reached for the cleaner rag. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't have to." She set the banana bread on the corner of my workbench right between the socket wrench set and a coffee can full of salvaged screws. "That's why I did it." She looked around the garage with the practiced eye of someone who had watched me rearrange this space 100 times. "You sleep at all last night?" "Enough." "That means no." She pulled up the old wooden stool I kept near the door, the one Ethan used to sit on as a boy, watching me work, asking questions about every tool on the wall. "You hear from him yet?" I didn't have to ask who she meant. "Got a text yesterday," I said, picking up the carburetor again and turning back to the mower. "He wants me to come to dinner Friday night." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post, and then thought better of it. "That's good, isn't it?" she said carefully. That he reached out? Maybe. I fitted the carburetor back into its housing and reached for the screwdriver. Or maybe he wants something. The words came out flatter than I intended, and I heard Dorothy shift on the stool. I hadn't always talked about my son that way. There was a time, a long time actually, when I would have defended Ethan against any suggestion of bad faith with the kind of stubborn loyalty that only fathers understand. That time had passed slowly, the way winter passes not all at once, but degree by degree, until one morning you realize the ground is frozen solid and you can't remember exactly when it happened. He's getting married in 10 days, I said. Big wedding from what I understand. Fancy venue up in Columbus. The girl's family has money. And he invited you? I picked up a bolt and turned it between my fingers. That's what I'm going to find out Friday. Dorothy watched me work for a while without speaking. That was one of the things I valued most about her. She understood the difference between a silence that needed filling and one that needed respecting. Margaret had been the same way. The two of them had been friends for over 2 decades, and sometimes I thought Dorothy kept showing up with banana bread, not just for me, but for some version of my wife that still lived in this house in the roses out front, and the handwriting on the recipe cards still stuck to the refrigerator. He looked good last time I saw him, Dorothy offered, driving that nice car. He does look good. I tightened the last bolt and straightened up, pressing one hand against the small of my back. Always did know how to put on a good show, Ethan. The words came out quiet, almost gentle, and I think that's what made them land so hard on me anyway. Dorothy must have heard something in them, because she looked at me with those sharp brown eyes that had seen 70 years of other people's troubles and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You going to be all right, Walter?" I looked at the workbench. At the tools hanging on their pegboard hooks, each one in its exact right place. At the banana bread in its kitchen towel. At the old wooden stool that still had a small crack in the seat from the day 8-year-old Ethan had stood up on it to reach a wrench, and it had nearly given out beneath him. I had caught him that day. Grabbed him by the back of his shirt before he hit the concrete floor. He had laughed that big, wide-open laugh he had as a kid, before everything got complicated, and said, "You're really strong, Dad." "I'll be fine," I told Dorothy. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they believe you, but want you to know they're watching. She slid off the stool, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and pointed at the banana bread. "Let's eat that before it gets cold. And Walter." She paused at the door. "Whatever happens Friday, you remember that you raised that boy the best you knew how. That counts for something. It counts for a lot." She left through the side gate, and the cardinal came back to the fence post, and this time stayed. I stood in my garage for a long time after that, holding a rag I didn't need anymore, looking at a stool with a cracked seat. Then my phone buzzed on the workbench. I picked it up, a text from Ethan. "Friday, 7 o'clock, Brennan's Steakhouse on High Street. Don't be late, Dad." I read it twice. There was no "hope you can make it," no "looking forward to seeing you," just a time, a place, and a reminder not to embarrass him by arriving late. I set the phone face down on the bench, pulled the starter cord on the mower, and listened to it fire up clean and steady on the very first pull. Brennan's Steakhouse on High Street was the kind of place that printed its menus without prices. I had driven past it 100 times over the years without ever going in. The kind of restaurant built for people who needed everyone in the room to know they could afford it. Dark mahogany walls, candlelight so dim you could barely read your water glass valets out front, who looked at your car before they looked at you. I had parked 2 blocks away and walked, partly because I refused to pay $12 for someone to move my truck 40 feet, and partly because I needed those 2 blocks to steady myself. I wore my good navy blazer. The one Margaret had picked out for me at Dillard's 11 years ago, the one I had worn to her funeral, and to every occasion that mattered since. It still fit. I had made sure of that. The hostess smiled at me the way people smile at someone they're not sure belongs. I gave her Ethan's name and she walked me through the restaurant with the particular efficiency of someone being paid to be pleasant. I spotted the table before she pointed to it. Ethan was already there, sitting beside a woman I didn't recognize across from an older woman whose posture alone announced she had spent considerable money learning how to sit that way. Ethan stood when he saw me, not because he was glad to see me. I could tell the difference. He stood the way you stand when your boss walks into the room, a reflex, not a feeling. Dad. He shook my hand. Not a hug, a handshake. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I said, and meant it more painfully than he knew. The younger woman beside him was Claire Whitfield, my son's fiancée. She was pretty in the careful way of someone who had worked at it, dark hair pinned back a single strand of pearls at her throat. She extended her hand and said, "Mr. Grayson, it's so lovely to finally meet you." With the smooth warmth of someone trained in the art of saying things she didn't entirely feel. I didn't hold that against her. Most people at a table like this were performing something. The older woman was her mother, Margaret Whitfield. She looked at my navy blazer the way a jeweler looks at a stone she already knows isn't worth her time. A single sweep head-to-toe conclusion reached before I pulled out my chair. She offered me a smile that was really just her lips moving and said, "Walter, what a pleasure," in a tone that suggested it was neither. The first hour was a masterclass in being invisible at your own dinner. Ethan dominated the conversation, the way he always had, loudly, confidently, with the particular energy of a man performing for an audience he desperately needed to impress. He talked about the wedding venue, the guest list, the imported floral arrangements that had apparently required 3 separate vendors. He talked about Columbus's restaurant scene, about a weekend trip to Charleston, about an investment portfolio he referenced twice without explaining. He talked about everything except me. When Margaret Whitfield asked about my background, Ethan answered before I could open my mouth. "Dad's basically retired," Ethan said, cutting into his ribeye without looking up. "Took it easy after the shop closed down." The shop didn't close down. I sold it. There's a difference that matters enormously to a man who built something from nothing, but I let it pass, the way I had learned to let things pass quietly and with a mental note. Claire asked me how I liked Denton. I told her it suited me. She nodded politely and turned back to her mother. Margaret Whitfield spent the remainder of dinner speaking exclusively to Ethan, occasionally touching Claire's arm to redirect her attention, and treating me with the specific brand of courtesy reserved for people you've already decided don't matter. I ate my steak. It was excellent. I gave them that. Then the plates were cleared. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, a jacket that cost more than my truck payment, and produced a thick cream envelope. He didn't hand it to me with both hands the way you offer something important to someone important. He slid it across the white linen tablecloth, the way you slide a bill towards someone you're waiting to leave. My name was written on the front in Ethan's handwriting. Neat, deliberate. No Dad. Just Walter Grayson. I picked it up, broke the seal, pulled out 2 sheets of paper. The first was an itemized receipt. My portion of the dinner calculated to the cent, the ribeye, the side of roasted potatoes, the glass of iced tea I had ordered instead of the wine. $72 for the steak, $18 for the potatoes, $9 for the tea, $13 in service charges, total $112. My son had sat across from me at a dinner table and billed me for my meal. The second sheet was a letter. Formal, printed on heavy paper with a small monogram at the top, e.g. for Ethan Grayson. I read every word carefully the way I read contracts, because that's exactly what it was. He was requesting my absence from his wedding. Claire's family, the letter explained, was accustomed to a certain standard of guest. The event would be attended by business associates, investors, and prominent community figures. My presence, given Mayan here, he had chosen the word carefully. Lifestyle would create an uncomfortable dynamic that he wasn't willing to risk on his wedding day. He wished me well. I sat with those 2 pieces of paper in my hands for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 30 seconds. Ethan was watching me with his jaw set and his eyes flat-braced for tears or anger or pleading. Margaret Whitfield was examining her dessert menu. Claire was looking somewhere just past my left shoulder, and her hands were folded very tightly in her lap. I folded both sheets, precisely creased them sharp, and slid them into the breast pocket of my navy blazer, right over my heart. Then I raised my hand for the waiter. When he came, I handed him 4 crisp $100 bills cash from the plain leather wallet I'd carried for 15 years and told him to apply it to the full table and keep what remained as his tip. The waiter's eyes widened slightly. He thanked me and moved away quickly. Ethan stared at the space where the money had been. A muscle moved in his jaw. He looked up at me, then really looked for the first time all evening, and said quietly but clearly enough for the table to hear, "Dad, please, just let me enjoy my special day." I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and looked at my son across the candlelit table. "Enjoy your wedding, Ethan," I said. "I hope everything goes exactly the way you've planned it." I walked out through the mahogany and candlelight. Through the front door the valet held open without being asked, and out into the cool October air of Columbus, Ohio. I didn't look back. I sat in my truck for 22 minutes before I started the engine. I know it was 22 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard tick from 9:14 to 9:36 without moving anything except my eyes. The parking garage on 4th Street was mostly empty at that hour, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with that particular hollow sound that makes you feel like the last person left on Earth. 2 levels up, the valets at Brennan's were probably parking someone else's car. Probably someone whose son had invited them to dinner for reasons that had nothing to do with the bill. I reached into my breast pocket and took out the 2 sheets of paper. I unfolded them across the steering wheel and read them again. Slower this time. The way I used to read contracts at the shop, not for what they said, but for what they meant. The itemized receipt first. $72 for the ribeye, $18 for the roasted potatoes, $9 for the iced tea, $13 in service charges. Every line neat and precise, the way Ethan had always been precise about money that wasn't his. I remembered teaching him to count change when he was 7 years old, spreading quarters and dimes across the kitchen table while Margaret made coffee. He had been so proud of himself when he got it right. Slapped both palms flat on the table and announced, "I'm going to be rich someday, Dad." I had laughed and told him that was fine as long as he was also kind. I had apparently only managed to teach him half of that lesson. The letter was worse than the receipt. Ethan had written it in that formal, bloodless language people use when they want to wound you efficiently and maintain plausible deniability about their intentions. Claire's family, he explained, moved in circles that valued a certain presentation. The wedding would be attended by individuals whose professional and social standing demanded an environment of, and here was his word, the one he had chosen carefully, refinement. My presence, given the nature of my background and my current lifestyle, would introduce an element of discomfort that he was not in a position to accommodate on what he called twice his special day. He had written special day twice, as though saying it once might not be enough to remind me that my feelings were less important than his floral arrangements. I sat there with that letter in my hands and let myself feel the full weight of it, the way you have to let yourself feel a thing completely before you can decide what to do with it. My chest ached in the particular way it had ached on the morning of Margaret's funeral, when the pastor had asked me to say a few words, and I had stood at that podium looking out at 60-some faces and understood for the first time what it meant to be truly alone in a room full of people. I thought about Ethan at 16, the first time he had been ashamed of me in public. He had been with a group of friends from his new school kids, from families with lake houses and European vacations, and I had pulled up to collect him in my work truck, still wearing my shop clothes, oil on my forearms. He had seen me from half a block away, and something had moved across his face. Not anger. Worse than anger. Embarrassment. He had said goodbye to his friends quickly and climbed into the truck without looking at me, and for the entire drive home he had stared out the passenger window and answered every question I asked him in words of one syllable. I had told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers were ashamed of their parents. It was practically a biological requirement. He would grow out of it. He had not grown out of it. He had grown into it. At 22, he had not invited me to his college graduation. "It's a small ceremony, Dad. Honestly, it's not worth the drive." I had watched the live stream alone on my laptop at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I waited for his name to be called. At 28, he had introduced me to a business associate as, "My father, he's in retirement." Not retired from running his own business for 30 years. Just in retirement, the way you'd describe someone who had quietly ceased to be relevant. And now at 31 he had handed me a bill for my dinner. I folded the letter back along its original creases and returned both sheets to the breast pocket of my blazer. Then I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and held them there until the pressure built into something almost physical, almost useful. And then I let it go. Margaret would have known what to say. She always did. She had this ability to take the most painful thing and hold it up to the light at a slightly different angle until you could see something in it that wasn't just pain. Walter, she used to say, "You can't make someone love you the way you need to be loved. You can only decide what you're going to do with the love you have left." She had said that about her own mother, not about Ethan. But the older I got, the more I understood that the people we love teach us lessons we don't recognize until we need them. I started the engine. The truck idled rough for a moment. It needed a new belt, had needed one for 3 weeks, and then smoothed out. I pulled out of the parking garage and onto High Street, heading west toward the interstate, toward Denton, toward my house on Clover Street, with the overgrown roses and the cracked porch board and the garage that smelled like oil and sawdust. I was 4 miles from home when my headlights swept across the front of my house, and I saw it. The back door was standing open, not wide open, just a few inches, but I had locked that door myself at 5 o'clock that afternoon before I left for dinner. I remembered it specifically because the lock had been stiff lately, and I had made the mental note to fix it. I sat in the driveway with the engine running and looked at that thin stripe of darkness between the door and the frame. The porch light was on. Nothing moved. But someone had been here. Or someone still was. The back door had been locked from the inside. That was the first thing I checked when I walked in the night before, hand tight on the flashlight I kept by the garage entrance. I went through the house room by room the way you do when you're 63 years old and alone, and someone has been inside your home, slowly, methodically, turning on every light. Nothing was missing. Nothing was visibly disturbed. But in the kitchen, one of the cabinet drawers was pushed in slightly crooked, the way it gets when someone opens it in a hurry and shoves it shut without lining up the track. I keep my utility bills in that drawer. My insurance documents. Nothing valuable to anyone who didn't know what they were looking for. Someone had been looking for something. I reset all the locks, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon I didn't finish. and sat in the armchair by the front window until well past midnight. I didn't sleep much. When the light finally came gray through the curtains, I got up, washed my face, and put the kettle on. That was when I found the phone. It was on the floor beside the baseboard heater in the hallway, half hidden under the edge of the runner rug. A smartphone in a black case face down. I picked it up and turned it over. The screen was cracked along one corner, but it lit up when I touched it. No passcode. And the name on the front of the case, written in silver marker, the way young men sometimes label things they're afraid of losing, read simply E. Grayson. Ethan had been here, in my house, while I was at dinner with him. He hadn't come himself, of course. That wasn't Ethan's way. He had sent someone, and that someone had dropped the phone on the way out. Probably in a hurry. Probably when I pulled into the driveway earlier than expected. I set the phone on the kitchen table and stood looking at it while the kettle began to whistle. I poured my tea. I sat down. I thought about calling Ethan to tell him he'd left it here, and the thought made something cold and clear move through my chest. The way river water moves in October, quiet and purposeful, and very, very cold. I left the phone on the table and drank my tea. At 7:43 it rang. The screen lit up with the name Derek. No last name. Just Derek, the way you save someone's number when you talk to them so often. You've stopped thinking of them as a separate person. The phone rang twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, the call connected automatically, the speaker function, activating the way it sometimes does on phones with cracked screens, a short circuit in the glass, sending the call straight to open audio before anyone could answer it deliberately. I did not touch the phone. I sat very still with my hands around my mug, and I listened. Ethan. The voice was male, younger than mine, with the clipped impatience of someone who made a lot of calls and expected them all to be answered quickly. Where are you? I've been trying you since last night. Static. Then Ethan's voice, slightly muffled as though he were in a car or a room with bad acoustics. I lost my phone. I'm calling from the hotel landline, just talk fast. Did he sign anything? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell me everything about its contents. Not yet, Ethan said. He didn't bring anything up at dinner, so I'm guessing he didn't read it carefully. Or he read it, and he's going to do what he always does, nothing. He's not a confrontational guy. You need that power of attorney before the wedding, Ethan. That was the whole point of this week. I know what the point is, Derek. Ethan's voice tightened. I'll get it. He trusts me. He always has. The words hit me somewhere below the sternum and stayed there. And the house? Derek asked. The accounts, because my guy says the property alone is worth. I know what it's worth, Ethan said, cutting him off. Once the wedding's done and I've got legal access, I'll have everything sorted within 30 days. He doesn't even know what he's sitting on, Derek. He thinks he's just an old man with a savings account and a paid-off house. He has no idea. Derek laughed. It was a short, satisfied sound, the kind that belongs in rooms where people talk about other people's money. And he's not going to cause problems, not going to lawyer up or anything. How him, Ethan said. And there it was, the tone I had heard aimed at me across restaurant tables and holiday dinners for 15 years, dressed up in different words, but always carrying the same freight. He fixes lawnmowers, Derek. He's not a problem. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him if I smile and tell him I need his help. The call ended 30 seconds later. I don't remember what else was said. I was looking at my hands around the mug, these hands that had built a business from nothing, that had fixed every broken thing in that house for 30 years, that had held my wife's hand in the hospital at the end, and held my son's hand on his first day of school at the beginning, and I was making a decision. Not an angry decision. Anger would have been easier. This was colder than anger, and quieter than anger, and it would last considerably longer. I stood up from the kitchen table. I picked up my own phone, the one with no cracks in the screen, and no strangers' voices coming out of it, and I scrolled to a number I had saved 11 years ago and never deleted. It rang twice. "Marcus Webb." "Marcus," I said. "It's Walter Grayson. I think it's time we had that conversation we talked about." A brief pause. Then, "I'll clear my afternoon. Can you be here by 2?" "I can be there by noon," I said. Marcus Webb's office on the 12th floor of the Riverside Tower had a view of the Scioto River that he had never once mentioned in 30 years of friendship, which told you everything you needed to know about Marcus Webb. He was the kind of man who had earned everything quietly and kept it the same way. We had met in 1994 at a city zoning meeting, where we were both arguing against a proposed development that would have put a highway bypass through the east side of Denton. We lost that fight, but we had coffee afterward and discovered we were the same kind of stubborn, which is the best possible foundation for a 30-year friendship. He had built one of the most respected estate and property law practices in central Ohio. I had built a machine shop. We had lunch every few months and never once ran out of things to argue about. His assistant showed me in at 11:58. Marcus was already standing when I entered, which meant he had been watching the door. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of gray at his temples that looks earned rather than aged. He shook my hand with both of his and said, "Sit down, Walter. You look like you haven't slept." "I slept a little," I said. "That means you didn't." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Good leather, worn soft from use, the kind of chair that had held a lot of people in difficult moments. "Talk to me." I talked. I told him about the dinner, the envelope, the itemized bill, and the letter requesting my absence from my son's wedding. I told him about coming home to find the back door open and the kitchen drawer pulled crooked. I told him about the phone on the floor and the conversation I had listened to that morning, Ethan's voice coming through the cracked speaker, clear and unhurried, and utterly certain that his father was not a problem. Marcus listened without interrupting. He had a yellow legal pad on the desk in front of him, and he wrote on it occasionally. But mostly he just listened with the focused stillness of a man who understood that the most important information was usually in the spaces between what people said. When I finished, he set down his pen. "Walter," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me the same way. Do you have a current will?" "I have a will from 2009, I said. "Margaret and I did it together, left everything to each other, and after both of us were gone, to Ethan." Marcus nodded slowly. "And your estate, the house on Clover Street, the investment accounts, the proceeds from the shop sale. Has Ethan ever seen a full accounting of what that amounts to?" I shook my head. "He knows about the house. He assumes the rest is modest, a savings account, maybe a small retirement fund." I never corrected that assumption. Marcus looked at me steadily. "Walter, your estate, as I understand it from the documents you shared with me when we updated your property deed 3 years ago, is considerably more than modest. We're talking about an amount that would give a certain kind of person a very strong motivation to act quickly and without scruples." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." Marcus turned his legal pad toward me. He had written 3 things on it numbered cleanly: new will, asset protection trust, POA revocation. "Here's what I want to explain to you clearly," he said, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. "Because I want you to understand exactly what you're protected against and exactly what you're not. A power of attorney. The document Ethan apparently wants you to sign is a legal instrument that grants another person the authority to make financial and legal decisions on your behalf. In Ohio, a properly executed POA can give the holder broad access to your bank accounts, the ability to sell real property, and control over investment decisions. If you signed what Ethan is preparing, he could liquidate your accounts and sell the house on Clover Street legally, and there would be very little recourse after the fact. The words landed in the room with a kind of weight that made the river view behind Marcus seem very far away. "I'm not going to sign it," I said. "Well, I know you're not," Marcus said. "But I want you to understand why it matters that we move today, not next week." He picked up his pen again. "Your 2009 will names Ethan as sole beneficiary. Until we change that document, it remains valid. If anything happened to you before we update it, everything goes to him automatically, regardless of what he's done or intends to do. Ohio law doesn't punish bad intentions. It only recognizes properly executed documents." I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a barge moved slowly down the Scioto, pushing a brown wake against the near bank. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "We execute a new will today," Marcus said. "We name alternative beneficiaries, whoever you choose. That's entirely your decision, and I won't ask. We establish a revocable living trust that moves your primary assets into a structure Ethan cannot access without a court order. And we document everything you've told me this morning, the dinner, the letter, the open door, the phone conversation, as a written record dated and signed, in case any of this becomes relevant to future legal proceedings." "Is what Ethan's planning illegal?" I asked. Marcus considered the question with the careful honesty of a man who had spent decades being precise about exactly this kind of thing. "What he's described wanting to do, obtain a POA through persuasion and use it to access your assets, is not illegal if you sign voluntarily. If he obtained your signature through fraud or coercion, that would be a different matter. What his associate discussed regarding your property without your knowledge edges toward conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of an elderly person, which is a serious offense in Ohio. But we're not at the point of criminal proceedings. Right now, we're at the point of making sure you're protected." "Then let's do that," I said. Marcus picked up his phone and pressed a single button. "Sandra, I need the standard trust package and a will amendment template, and clear my 2 o'clock. He set the phone down and looked at me with the directness of someone who had been my friend for 30 years and intended to remain so. "Walter, who do you want to leave it to?" I looked out at the river for a long moment. I thought about Dorothy's banana bread on the corner of my workbench. I thought about a machine shop I had built with my own hands and sold to a young man who had good instincts. I thought about rose bushes that needed tending. "I have some ideas," I said. Marcus uncapped his pen. "Tell me." 3 days before his wedding, my son showed up at my door with a box of donuts. Not just any donuts. Donuts from Schuler's Bakery on Maple Avenue, the place where I used to take Ethan every Saturday morning when he was small enough to need help climbing onto the counter stool. He always ordered the same thing, a glazed twist and a chocolate milk, and he would eat with both elbows on the counter and swing his legs because they didn't reach the footrest yet. I had not been inside Schuler's in years. The fact that Ethan remembered it, that he had driven out of his way to stop there on the morning he planned to ask me to sign away everything I owned, told me exactly how carefully he had planned this visit. He was wearing a casual jacket and jeans, which was deliberate. Ethan in a suit would have looked like business. Ethan in jeans looked like a son coming home. "Hey, Dad." He held up the pink bakery box with a smile that reached his eyes just far enough to be convincing. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by." Ethan had not been in this neighborhood without a specific purpose since Margaret's funeral. But I opened the door wider and said, "Come on in," because I wanted to see how far he was willing to go. He went pretty far. He complimented the kitchen. He asked about the roses out front, said they were looking good, which they weren't, but points for trying. He opened the bakery box on the counter and pushed it toward me with both hands, and offering a gesture the body language of a man who had rehearsed being casual. I took a glazed twist and leaned against the counter and watched him move around my kitchen, like he was reacquainting himself with the dimensions of a room he intended to own. "Big week for you," I said. "Yeah." He poured himself a coffee without asking, which he had always done and which had never bothered me until right now. "It's a lot of moving parts. Claire's mom has opinions about everything, which is—" He shook his head with a short laugh. "You know how it is." I did not know how it was because no one had seen fit to include me in any of the moving parts. But I nodded and ate my donut and let him talk. He talked for 11 minutes about the wedding, about the venue and the catering, and a disagreement about centerpieces that had apparently consumed 3 days of everyone's emotional energy. He was performing normalcy, and he was good at it. I could see why people believed him, why Claire had believed him, why a room full of strangers at a steakhouse had looked at my son and seen a confident, successful young man with his life assembled correctly. Then he set his coffee mug down and reached into his jacket pocket. "So listen, Dad." His voice shifted registers, still warm, but with a new note underneath it, something practiced and careful. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. With the wedding coming up and everything, it got me thinking about the future. About making sure you're taken care of, in case anything ever happens." He placed the document on the counter between us. Several pages stapled at the corner, dense with language that was designed to be difficult to read quickly. "It's just a power of attorney," he said with exactly the ease of someone who had said those words in a mirror until they sounded like nothing. "Standard stuff. It just means that if you ever get sick or if there's ever an emergency while I'm traveling, I can handle things for you. Pay bills, deal with the bank, whatever needs doing. So you don't have to worry." He slid it a few inches closer to me across the counter. I looked at the document. I looked at my son's face, open, concerned, the picture of filial devotion. I thought about Marcus's voice 3 days ago. A properly executed POA can give the holder the ability to sell real property and liquidate your accounts legally. I thought about Ethan's voice through a cracked phone screen. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him if I smile and tell him I need his help. I set my donut down. I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator, not the utility bill drawer, the one on the other side, and I took out the envelope I had placed there 2 days ago when I got home from Marcus's office. Inside was a cashier's check, made out to Ethan Grayson. $50,000. A wedding gift I had prepared 3 weeks ago, before the dinner, before the envelope, before I understood clearly what kind of man my son had become. I held it for a moment. Then I tore it in half. The sound was very loud in the quiet kitchen. A clean, sharp tear, the check splitting precisely down the middle. I placed both halves on the counter beside the POA document and looked at my son. Ethan's expression collapsed through several stages in rapid succession: confusion, then the beginning of anger, then something I can only describe as recalculation, the look of a man rapidly revising his assumptions. "Dad, what?" "I'm not going to sign that document, Ethan," I said. My voice came out even and quiet, the way it used to come out on the shop floor when something had gone seriously wrong and I needed everyone to stay calm and listen carefully. "I want you to take it with you when you leave." His jaw tightened. The casual sun dissolved, and something flatter and harder came to the surface. "You don't even know what you're turning down. I'm trying to help you." "I know exactly what I'm turning down," I said. He stared at the two halves of the check. something moved through his eyes. Not grief, not shame. Arithmetic. He was calculating what the torn check meant for his other plans, running the numbers on a future he had already spent in his head. "Fine," he said. He picked up the POA document and folded it back into his jacket pocket. He did not touch the bakery box. He did not say goodbye. He walked to the front door and pulled it open hard enough that the little brass knocker swung and struck the plate with a sharp, metallic crack. I stood in my kitchen and listened to his car start in the driveway. Listened to it back out. Listened to it accelerate down Clover Street faster than the speed limit. Then I picked up the two halves of the check, held them over the trash can under the sink, and let them go. I washed my hands. I poured a fresh cup of coffee. I ate the second half of my glazed twist. Outside, the cardinal was back on the fence post. Same bird, probably. They tend to return to the same place as cardinals. It's in their nature. I had been in bed for 40 minutes when the phone rang. Not asleep, I hadn't reached that point yet. I had been lying on my back in the dark with my hands folded on my chest, staring at the ceiling the way I had been doing most nights that week, running through the same list of things I could control and the same list of things I couldn't, trying to keep the two lists from blurring together. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:47. I reached for the phone before the second ring finished. Dorothy's number. I answered immediately. Walter. Her voice was low and tight, in a way I had never heard from her before. Dorothy Simmons was not a woman who alarmed easily, which made the sound of alarm in her voice land like a stone dropped in still water. "There is a light on in your garage, and I am almost certain it is not you." I was sitting up before she finished the sentence. "What kind of light?" "Flashlight, I think. Moving around." "I saw it through the side window of your garage. You know I can see that window from my kitchen when I get up for water." A pause. "Walter, I almost called 911. "Don't," I said. I was already out of bed, feet on the floor, reaching for the jeans I had left folded over the chair by the window. "Don't call anyone, Dorothy. Just stay inside and keep your lights off." "What is going on?" Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I realized she was frightened, genuinely. Frightened, the kind that comes from being 70 years old and alone and watching a stranger move through your neighbor's garage at midnight. My chest tightened with something that had nothing to do with Ethan. "It's going to be fine," I said, and I meant it, which was the only reason I could say it steadily. "I know who it is. He won't hurt anything. Just stay where you are, and I'll explain everything tomorrow morning. Can you do that for me?" A long pause. Then, "Walter Grayson, you had better explain every single thing tomorrow morning." "I will," I said. "I promise." She hung up. I stood at the bedroom window and looked out toward the garage. Dorothy was right, I could see it too now that I was looking. A thin, intermittent light moving behind the frosted glass of the side window. Someone with a flashlight moving slowly, searching. I did not go out there. I want to be clear about that choice because it was a choice, not a failure of nerve. I had considered what I would do if Ethan escalated after the donut visit, and I had made my decision before it happened, which is the only way to make a decision like that clearly. If I went into the garage, one of two things would happen. Either Ethan's person would run, and I would have nothing, or there would be a confrontation in the dark between a 63-year-old man and someone I didn't know. And that was a situation with outcomes I wasn't willing to risk. More importantly, I had nothing in that garage worth finding. After my meeting with Marcus 3 days ago, I had spent an afternoon moving every document of consequence out of the house. The deed to the property, the account statements, the trust paperwork Marcus had prepared, the copy of the new will signed and witnessed and as legally airtight as 30 years of estate law could make it. All of it was now in a fireproof lockbox in Marcus's office on the 12th floor of the Riverside Tower, behind a door that required a key card and a security code to open. What remained in the garage was what had always been in the garage: tools. A half-rebuilt lawnmower, a coffee can full of salvaged screws, 40 years of accumulated hardware that meant everything to me and nothing to anyone trying to steal a financial future. Let him look, I had told Dorothy. So I let him look. I sat in the armchair by the front window, the same one I had occupied 2 nights ago when I first came home to find the back door open, and I watched the thin light move behind the garage window. It moved for about 20 minutes. Methodical at first, then faster then with the particular agitation of someone who has searched everywhere twice and found nothing both times. Then it went out. A minute later, I heard the soft sound of the side gate latch. Footsteps on the gravel path along the fence line, quick and quiet. A car door somewhere down the block, not directly in front of the house, which meant they had parked away deliberately. An engine starting, idling briefly, then pulling away. The street was empty and dark and completely quiet. I stayed in the armchair for a while longer. Not because I was afraid, but because the house felt very still, and I needed a moment inside that stillness to understand something I had been circling around for days without quite landing on. Ethan was not going to stop. The donuts and the smile and the carefully rehearsed concern, those had been the first move, the easy move, the one he had probably always used on me, because it had always worked before. When that failed, he had moved to the second move within 48 hours. He was not patient. He was not calculating the long game. He was running out of time before the wedding, before whatever pressure Derek and his associates were applying reached a point he couldn't manage, and he was accelerating. That told me something important. I got up from the armchair, walked to the hallway, and took the framed photograph off the shelf beside the coat rack. Ethan at 6 years old, first day of school. Big backpack, bigger smile. He had been so happy that morning, genuinely uncomplicated, happy the way children are happy before the world teaches them to want things they don't have. I carried the photo into the kitchen and set it on the table where I could see it. Then I put the kettle on because it was past midnight, and I was not going to sleep, and I had learned a long time ago that some nights are just for sitting with difficult things until they become slightly less difficult. I looked at the boy in the photograph while the kettle heated. "What happened to you?" I said quietly to the kitchen. The kettle began to whistle, and I had no answer. And outside, the street stayed dark and empty all the way until morning. I had planned to stay home, drink too much coffee, and continue the process of not sleeping that had consumed most of the previous night. But by 9 o'clock, the refrigerator was offering me mustard and half a block of cheddar and not much else. And I decided that a man who was about to dismantle his son's financial schemes ought to at least be able to make himself a decent sandwich. So I put on a clean shirt, drove the 4 miles to the Kroger on Winchester Road, and pushed a cart through the automatic doors into the particular fluorescent calm of a Tuesday morning grocery store. I was in the cereal aisle debating between 2 boxes of oatmeal with the kind of focus that only comes from having slept 3 hours when I heard her voice. Margaret Whitfield was 2 aisles over. I could tell it was her before I saw her, that particular carrying quality of a woman accustomed to being listened to in large rooms, the volume pitched just slightly above what any conversation actually requires. She was on the phone, walking slowly past the canned goods with a small basket over one arm, and the absolute assurance of someone who had never once considered that other people in a grocery store might be able to hear her. I set one of the oatmeal boxes down and stood very still. "Of course the boy has resources." She paused, listening. "His father owns property all over central Ohio. Claire just needs to get through Saturday, and the rest takes care of itself. That's how these things work, Patricia." I put the second oatmeal box in my cart. and moved to the end of the aisle, staying close to the shelving unit, close enough to hear clearly, without being visible around the corner. The father won't be at the wedding." A short, dismissive laugh. "Ethan said he's not entirely well. Mentally. Poor old man apparently hasn't been quite right for some time. Ethan's been managing the situation very carefully." Another pause. "Yes, I know. It's sad. But these things happen in families, and Ethan has been wonderfully patient about it. Claire is lucky to have found someone so devoted." I stood at the end of the cereal aisle with my hand resting on the cart handle and let those words move through me completely. The way you let cold water move through you when you first step into a river. The shock of it, then the adjustment, then the strange clarity that comes after. Ethan had told the Whitfields I was mentally unstable. He had constructed an entire narrative: patient, devoted son, managing a difficult father who wasn't quite right. And he had told it so convincingly that Margaret Whitfield was repeating it to her friends over the phone in a Kroger at 9 in the morning, with complete confidence in its truth. He had not just excluded me from his wedding, he had erased me. Replaced the actual Walter Grayson with a sad, diminished version that conveniently explained why I would never be seen, never be consulted, never be in a position to contradict anything Ethan said about the family finances. It was, I had to admit, a thorough piece of work. Margaret rounded the corner of the canned goods aisle, still talking basket swinging, and walked directly toward me. I had approximately 2 seconds to decide what to do with those 2 seconds. I stayed where I was. I looked at the shelf in front of me, creamed corn, 3 cans for $4, and I waited. She almost walked past me. Then something made her glance up, and she stopped. For a moment, she simply looked at me the way you look at something your brain is having trouble categorizing. I was out of context. I belonged to the world of the steakhouse dinner, the formal setting, the evening where she had assessed me and found me wanting. Here, under grocery store lights with a cart full of oatmeal and sandwich supplies, I was an anomaly. "Walter," she said. The phone was still in her hand, call apparently ended. I didn't know you shopped here." Morning, Mrs. Whitfield." I reached past her to take one of the cans of creamed corn because I needed something to do with my hands, and I have never in my life bought creamed corn, but I bought it that morning without hesitation. Getting ready for the big weekend, something flickered behind her eyes, a rapid, practiced reassessment. Yes, of course. So much still to organize. She tilted her head in that particular way that substitutes for genuine sympathy. "And how are you doing, Walter? Ethan mentioned you've been managing some things." "I'm managing just fine," I said pleasantly. "Never better, actually." The flicker again. Faster this time. "What? That's wonderful," she said in the tone people use when something is not wonderful at all, but they have committed to the word and must see it through. She shifted her basket to her other arm. "Well, I'm sure Saturday will be a beautiful day. Even if—" she paused, choosing, and settled on, "even if the circumstances aren't quite what any of us might have imagined." "No," I agreed. "I don't imagine Saturday will go quite the way anyone has imagined." She looked at me for one beat too long. Then she smiled, the same smile she had produced at the steakhouse functional surface level. A smile that had probably gotten her through 30 years of difficult social situations without ever once requiring her to feel anything. "Take care of yourself, Walter." "Always do," I said. She moved past me toward the dairy section, heels clicking on the linoleum, and I stood there with a can of creamed corn in my hand, watching her go. She pulled out her phone before she reached the end of the aisle and was already dialing someone by the time she turned the corner. I put the creamed corn back on the shelf. I pushed my cart to the checkout, paid for my oatmeal and sandwich supplies, and sat in my truck in the parking lot for 3 minutes. Then I took out my phone and typed a message to Marcus Ran into the mother of the bride this morning. She told someone on the phone that I'm mentally unstable. That's what Ethan's been telling them. Add it to the file. Marcus replied in 4 minutes, noted and added, "This actually helps us. Fabricating a mental health narrative to isolate a parent and facilitate asset transfer is a recognized pattern. Our documentation is stronger for it. Stay the course." I read that twice. Then I started the truck, pulled out of the Kroger parking lot, and drove home on Winchester Road with the windows down, and the October air coming in cold and clean, and tasting faintly of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. The particular smell of Ohio in the fall that I had known my whole life, and that still, even now, even this week, made something in my chest loosen just enough to breathe. The porch light next door came on at 7:45, and 10 minutes later, Dorothy appeared at my side gate with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and the expression of a woman who had decided something and wasn't going to be talked out of it. "Move over," she said, nodding at the second porch chair. "I'm not sitting on that step. My knees are 68 years old and they know it." I moved over. She handed me one of the mugs, settled into the chair with the careful deliberateness of someone respecting the limits of a body that had carried her faithfully for 7 decades, and pulled her cardigan tighter across her chest. The October air had a real edge to it tonight. Not cold enough for frost, but cold enough that you could feel the season committing. Above the roofline across the street, the sky was doing something extraordinary. The kind of deep, saturated dark that only happens in small towns. Far enough from city lights to remember what darkness actually looks like, and the stars were out in a way that felt almost excessive, like the sky was overcompensating for something. We sat without talking for a while. That was one of the things I had always valued most about Dorothy Simmons. She understood that some silences were not problems to be solved, but spaces to be occupied, and she could occupy them with a grace that most people never learn. The chamomile was good. She made it stronger than I would have with honey, which I didn't usually take, but tonight it tasted exactly right. "He didn't call you today," Dorothy said finally. It wasn't a question. "No," or yesterday. "No." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "The rehearsal dinner is tonight, over in Columbus. Big affair, I imagine." "I imagine so." She turned to look at me directly, the way Dorothy looked at you when she was finished with the perimeter and wanted to go straight to the center of a thing. "Walter, how are you actually doing?" I thought about giving her the same answer I had given her every time she asked this week, the short, sufficient answer that was technically true and emotionally incomplete. Then I decided that it was late and the stars were out, and I was tired of sufficient answers. "I keep thinking about the last time Ethan and I had a genuinely good day together," I said. "Do you know how far back I have to go to find it? 7 years? He came home for Margaret's birthday, the last one before she got sick, and we grilled out in the backyard, just the 3 of us, and Ethan was... I don't know. He was present. He laughed at things that were actually funny instead of performing laughter. He helped me fix the screen door after dinner without being asked." I looked at the mug in my hands. 7 years is a long time to be carrying the last good day. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He borrowed $800 from me last week." I turned to look at her. "Dorothy, I know." She held up one hand. "I know Walter. He said it was for your wedding gift. Said he wanted to get you something special, but was a little short." She shook her head with the particular weariness of a woman who has seen enough of the world to recognize a lie while she's being told it and do nothing because the alternative is worse. I gave it to him because he's your boy. That's the only reason. And I want you to know that I don't want it back, and I don't want you to feel responsible for it. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the full picture. The anger that moved through me then was not the hot kind. It was the cold, settling kind that sinks into your bones and stays there. My son had borrowed money from a 70-year-old widow on a fixed income by using me as the justification. He had taken Dorothy's $800 money she had probably counted out from her savings account, with the careful attention of someone who knows exactly what $800 means, and he had done it while planning to strip me of everything I owned. "I'll pay you back," I said. "You absolutely will not," Dorothy said firmly. "That money is gone, and I have made my peace with it, and the subject is closed." She paused. "What I want to know is whether you are going to be all right. Not this week. After." I looked up at the stars for a long moment. A satellite moved steadily across the bowl of the sky from west to east, blinking its small, patient light. "I think so," I said. "I think I've been all right for longer than I've been giving myself credit for. I just kept waiting for him to come back. The kid who used to sit on that cracked stool in the garage and ask me how everything worked. I kept thinking that if I was patient enough, if I didn't push too hard, he'd find his way back to being that person. And now, I set my mug down on the porch railing. Now I think that kid is gone. I think he's been gone for a long time. And I think the kindest thing I can do for both of us is stop waiting for someone who isn't coming home." Dorothy reached over and placed her hand over mine on the armrest. Her hand was smaller than I remembered, the knuckles more prominent, the skin thin in the way of people who have lived long enough for the body to start saying what it means. She didn't say anything for a while, and I didn't need her to. "Your wife would be proud of you," she said finally. "The way you've handled all of this. Margaret always said you were the most patient man she had ever known. She also said I was the most stubborn," I said. Dorothy laughed a real laugh, short and warm, the kind that belongs on front porches in October. She wasn't wrong about either. We sat there for another half hour until the mugs were empty and the cold had worked its way properly through our jackets. When Dorothy stood to go, she paused at the top of the porch steps and looked back at me. "Now, whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "you remember that you did everything a father could do. The rest is not your fault, and never was." She went home through the side gate. I listened to her porch door close. Then I sat alone for another few minutes looking at the stars, and I said a quiet word upward that I won't repeat here because some things are between a man and God, and nobody else. Then I went inside, washed the mugs, and went to bed. I fell asleep in under 10 minutes. The first time all week. I woke up at 5:53 and lay still for a moment listening. The house was quiet in the particular way of early Saturday mornings, a deeper quiet than weekdays, as though the neighborhood itself had collectively decided to sleep in and the silence had thickened accordingly. No traffic on Clover Street. No school buses. Somewhere 2 blocks over, a dog was making a half-hearted case for breakfast, but even that sounded muffled and distant, like something happening in another version of the morning. I got up, washed my face, and put the kettle on. While the water heated, I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard. The roses Margaret had planted along the south fence were past their season. Now the last blooms gone brown at the edges, the canes beginning their annual retreat. She had planted 6 bushes the spring after we moved in, choosing them with the seriousness she brought to everything that mattered, driving to 3 different nurseries before she found the varieties she wanted. Every fall she cut them back herself, wearing the canvas gloves she kept on the 3rd hook by the garage door. Every spring they came back. They had come back every spring for 29 years, through drought and hard freezes, and one particularly bad summer when a fungus took half the leaves, and she had nursed them through it with a patience that made me feel inadequate by comparison. They would come back again in April. They always did. I poured my tea and carried it out to the garage. The Craftsman mower was where I had left it, reassembled, carburetor cleaned, and reinstalled, new fuel line threaded and connected. All it needed was a test run to confirm the repair had held. I topped off the gas tank from the red can on the bottom shelf, checked the oil, and pulled the starter cord. The engine turned over on the first pull and ran clean and steady, the way a well-maintained small engine runs, when everything is seated correctly and the fuel is flowing the way it should. I let it idle for 2 minutes, listening to it, feeling the vibration through the handle grips. Then I killed the engine and stood in the quiet that followed, which always sounds slightly more complete after noise has just occupied it. 41 years of working with engines had given me an ear for the difference between something running well and something running right. This was running right. I nodded to myself, hung the pull cord back on its hook, and covered the mower with the canvas tarp. I kept folded on the workbench shelf. Dorothy appeared at the side gate at 7:15, as I had somehow known she would. She was wearing her good blue cardigan, the one she saved for church, and occasions that required more than the everyday version of herself. And she was carrying a plate covered in aluminum foil. Scrambled eggs and wheat toast, as it turned out, which she set on the workbench beside my tea, with the no-nonsense efficiency of a woman who has decided that feeding people is a form of argument she consistently wins. "You look better," she said, studying my face with the directness of someone who had earned the right to look at you that way. "I slept," I said. "Good." She glanced at the covered mower. "You fixed it." "Finally." She nodded, satisfied, as though the mower's successful repair confirmed something she had already believed. "Eat your eggs before they get cold, Walter." I ate my eggs. They were good, better than anything I would have made myself, which was the point, and we both knew it. Dorothy sat on the old wooden stool and drank the coffee she had brought in her own thermos, and we talked about ordinary things for a while. The Hendersons down the street were finally selling their house. The library was doing a fall book sale next weekend. The forecaster was calling for temperatures in the mid-50s by afternoon, which was about right for mid-October in Ohio. We did not talk about the wedding. At 8:30, Dorothy took her plate and thermos and went home, pausing at the gate to tell me she would be around all day if I needed anything. I told her I knew. She nodded and let herself out, and I listened to the latch click behind her. I washed my hands at the garage sink and went inside. I poured a second cup of tea, a habit Margaret had given me the belief that a second cup in the morning was not indulgence but infrastructure, and I carried it to the living room and sat in my chair and turned on the television. I was not looking for anything specific. I put on the local Columbus news because it was what came on when I pressed the power button, and I sat there in the Saturday morning quiet of my living room with my tea and watched a segment about a pumpkin festival in Circleville and a report on road construction on I-270 that had been ongoing since approximately the Eisenhower administration, and I felt for the first time in 2 weeks something close to ordinary. My son was getting married in 4 hours 45 minutes from this chair. He was getting married in a rented tuxedo with rented flowers paid for with borrowed money to a woman whose family he had deceived as thoroughly as he had deceived mine, in a venue full of people who believed a version of this day that had no more substance than the morning frost that would be gone by 9 o'clock. I sipped my tea. The news segment changed. A reporter I recognized from the evening broadcast appeared on screen, standing outside a building. I also recognized the Columbus Grand Venue on Broad Street, where Ethan had booked the reception hall. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Lev Local Wedding Ceremony Underway at Columbus Grand. Follow for updates." They were covering it. Someone had tipped the local news that this was worth a camera. I set my mug down on the side table and leaned forward slightly in my chair. Then across the bottom of the screen, the red breaking news banner appeared. The ticker read, "Wedding ceremony interrupted at Columbus Grand Venue, details developing." I straightened up. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post and tucked its wings. The red banner stayed on the screen. I leaned forward in my chair and turned up the volume with the remote. The reporter outside Columbus Grand was a young woman in a burgundy blazer who had the particular alertness of someone who had been sent to cover a routine wedding feature and was now realizing she was standing outside something considerably less routine. Behind her, through the venue's tall glass doors, I could see movement people crossing back and forth with the rapid, directionless energy of a crowd that has lost its organizing principle. "We're getting reports of a significant disruption inside the venue," she said, one hand pressed to her earpiece. "Details are still coming in, but sources tell us the ceremony itself has been interrupted. We have a camera crew attempting to gain access to the main hall. We'll bring you that footage as soon as we have it." I sat back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. I had known this was coming. I had known it the way you know a storm is coming, when the barometric pressure drops and the birds go quiet, and the air takes on that particular weighted stillness that your body recognizes before your mind catches up. I had known it since the morning I sat at my kitchen table listening to Ethan's voice come through a cracked phone screen, telling Derek that everything was under control. Nothing had been under control. It had never been under control. It had only looked that way from the inside. I thought about what was happening inside Columbus Grand at this exact moment, and I did not have to imagine very hard, because I knew all the components. I had known them for 2 weeks. The catering. That would have been first. Ethan had placed deposits on the food and beverage service with a credit card, whose available balance I now understood to be essentially theoretical, a number that existed on a statement, but had no corresponding reality in any actual account. The final payment, the substantial one, the one that triggered the release of the full service, would have been due that morning. When the card was run and declined, the catering manager, a professional who had seen this before, who had a contract that was specific about exactly this contingency, would have done what the contract required. He would have spoken privately to the responsible party. He would have offered a grace period of perhaps 30 minutes. He would have accepted a second card, and possibly a third. And when all of them failed, he would have made a radio call to his team and begun the orderly withdrawal of services that the contract both permitted and required. The bar would have closed first. The visible thing, the thing guests would notice immediately, the champagne carts rolling back toward the service entrance, the bartenders covering the bottles with white linen, the sudden absence of the thing that was supposed to be flowing freely and celebrating something. I thought about Ethan's face when the first card declined. I had seen that face across a kitchen counter 3 days ago, the rapid recalculation, the arithmetic running behind his eyes. I thought about him trying a second card, then a third, the way a man pulls at a door that is locked and keeps pulling because he cannot accept that it is simply permanently locked. I thought about Margaret Whitfield watching this happen. She had built her entire calculation on Ethan's resources she had never verified, because the story he told was the story she needed to hear. She had pushed her daughter toward this marriage with the confidence of a woman who believed she had done her due diligence, and the due diligence had consisted entirely of believing what a charming young man told her over dinner at an expensive restaurant. I did not feel satisfaction at the thought of her watching the champagne carts roll away. I felt something more complicated than that something that recognized her as a person who had also been deceived, even if her willingness to be deceived had served her own purposes. On the television, a shaky vertical video appeared in the corner of the screen the kind shot on a smartphone by a wedding guest who had made the same calculation every person in that room was probably making right now, which was that what was happening in front of them was more significant than anyone's request for discretion. The anchor cut to it immediately. The footage was poor quality, but unmistakable. I could see the interior of the main hall, white chairs, white flowers, crystal chandeliers catching the light, and I could see people standing instead of sitting, which is never a good sign at a ceremony that is supposed to be in progress. I could see the front of the hall where the officiant's podium stood, and I could see two figures near it, and even through the shaky, low-resolution video, I could tell from the body language alone that what was happening between those two figures was not the exchange of vows. The anchor said, "We want to caution our viewers that this footage is unverified and represents an ongoing situation. We'll have a reporter on scene momentarily." I turned the volume up 2 more notches. The television showed me the exterior of the building again. More people, now guests, spilling out through the side doors, in the particular dispersed way of a crowd that has been told nothing official, but has understood everything anyway. A woman in a lilac dress was on her phone before she had fully cleared the doorway. A man in a gray suit was gesturing to someone behind him with the urgent economy of movement that means hurry. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had said something to me that I had written down on the yellow legal pad he had given me at the end of our first meeting, because it seemed like the kind of thing worth having in writing. He had said, "Walter, the most durable structures are the ones built on what is actually true. Everything built on what people wish were true eventually meets the same outcome. The only variable is timing." I looked at the people streaming out of Columbus Grand on my television screen. The timing, it turned out, had been a Saturday morning in October. I picked up my mug. The tea had gone cold while I was watching, which meant I had been sitting in this chair in this stillness for longer than I had realized. I stood and carried the mug to the kitchen and poured it down the sink and put the kettle back on. Through the kitchen window, I could see the roses along the south fence, brown-edged and past their season, and beyond them, the neighbor's oak tree dropping the last of its leaves in the windless morning air, each one falling straight down with the unhurried finality of something that has simply run its course. The kettle began to build toward its whistle. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Marcus. "Are you watching the news?" I typed back. "Yes." His reply came in under a minute. "Stay where you are. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I'll call you this afternoon." I set the phone down. The kettle whistled. I made fresh tea. I did not learn what happened in that bridal suite until Claire told me herself 3 days after the wedding. But I have thought about it enough times since then that I can see it almost as clearly as if I had been there, the white dress, the morning light. The moment a woman realizes that the life she believed she was walking toward does not exist. This is what she told me. She had been in the bridal suite at Columbus Grand since 7:30 that morning. The room was the kind of extravagant that exists specifically to be photographed floor-length mirrors framed in gold, a chaise longue upholstered in ivory silk champagne flutes, arranged on a silver tray that no one had touched yet, because the mood in the room had been wrong from the moment Claire arrived. Her bridesmaids were there, doing the things bridesmaids do, steaming the dress, arranging flowers, filling the silences with the particular bright chatter of women who sense that something is off but have not yet been given permission to say so. Claire had not slept well. She told me that she had been lying awake since 3 in the morning, with a feeling she could not name precisely, the kind of unease that does not announce its source, but simply occupies your chest and refuses to leave. She had told herself it was nerves. Every bride had nerves. That was what nerves were for. At 9:45, her phone rang. The number was not in her contacts. She almost did not answer, but something she said, she could not explain it. Only that it felt like the kind of call you know you need to take even before you know why, made her step away from her bridesmaids and walk to the window and press the green button. The man on the other end identified himself as a creditor representative. He spoke with the flat, rehearsed patience of someone who made calls like this every day and had long since stopped expecting them to go well. He was looking for Ethan Grayson. He understood Mr. Grayson was getting married today, and he apologized for the timing, but a payment of $23,000 was now 93 days overdue, and his firm had exhausted every other avenue of contact. Claire said she would pass the message along. She hung up and stood at the window for a long moment, looking down at the parking lot below, where the catering van was still unloading. Her hands were steady. That was the detail she kept coming back to when she told me how steady her hands were even then, when everything was beginning to shift beneath her. She looked around the bridal suite. The bridesmaids were laughing about something near the mirror. The dress was hanging on the back of the bathroom door, the train carefully arranged to prevent creasing. On the small table beside the chaise, half hidden under Claire's own handbag, was a phone in a black case that did not belong to her. Ethan had left it there the night before. He had come to the suite for the rehearsal dinner toast and forgotten it in the confusion of leaving. Claire picked it up. The screen lit immediately, no passcode. The same cracked corner she had noticed before, the same silver marker initials on the case. She told me later that she had not made a decision to look. She had simply looked the way when something is directly in front of you, and your mind is already moving toward an answer. It has not yet fully formed. The messages were not hidden. They were simply there the way things are simply there when no one has thought to conceal them, because no one imagined they would ever need to. The conversation with Derek Holloway was at the top of the recent list. She read it from the bottom up, the way you reconstruct something that has already happened. Derek asking whether the old man had signed anything yet. Ethan saying not yet, but he would, he always did. Derek asking about the house and the accounts. Ethan explaining the plan with the comfortable thoroughness of a man talking to someone who already knew the shape of it. The wedding, the position it would create, the access it would provide, the 30 days he had estimated for full resolution. And then 4 messages from the top, a line that she read 3 times before she fully absorbed it. She thinks I actually love her. It's almost sad. But her family's debt is manageable and the old man's property covers the rest. Once I'm in. 2 years max and I'm done. Claire set the phone down on the table beside the champagne flutes. She stood very still for a moment. Not frozen, she told me there was nothing frozen about it. No shock, no sudden collapse. It was more like the sensation of something sliding into place, a piece of information settling into a space that had been shaped for it, without her knowing, confirming an outline she had felt around the edges of, for months, without being able to see it clearly. Her bridesmaids were still talking near the mirror. The dress was still hanging on the bathroom door. She walked to the bathroom and closed the door behind her, and stood at the sink with the water running cold over her wrists, the way her grandmother had taught her to do when she needed to think clearly in a hurry. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. The hair pinned, the makeup done, the woman who had been standing in the middle of a story she had not written and had not been given the chance to read before agreeing to live inside it. Her mother knocked on the bathroom door. "Claire, we need to start getting you into the dress. We're running behind." Claire turned off the water. She dried her hands on the white monogrammed towel hanging beside the sink. She looked at herself in the mirror for one more second. Really looked the way you look at yourself when you are about to do something that cannot be undone, and you want to be sure you are the person doing it on purpose. Then she opened the door. Her mother stood there with the expression she always wore when logistics required managing, brisk, purposeful, in control of everything, except, as it turned out, the most important thing. Mom, Claire said quietly, did you know he doesn't have any money? The pause that followed lasted exactly long enough. Claire. Her mother said, we need to get you into your dress. Claire looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she nodded once slowly and walked past her toward the dress hanging on the bathroom door. She began the process of putting it on with the calm, deliberate movements of a woman who has made her decision and is simply moving through the remaining steps before she gets to act on it. She did not say another word to her mother until they were standing at the entrance to the main hall, the music starting, the doors about to open. Mom, she said, without turning her head. Whatever happens in there, I need you to know that I know. The doors opened. Claire walked through them alone. Before I reveal the shocking confrontation right at the altar, leave a comment with 999 or still here down below, so I know you're still along for the ride. And a quick heads up, the following events include some fictional details added for dramatic effect. If you're only looking for strict reality, feel free to pause the video right here. Otherwise, let's watch the truth come to light. The footage appeared on my television at 11:22. Not the professional camera crew, they were still trying to negotiate access with the venue's event coordinator. A negotiation that would ultimately prove unnecessary, because by the time they gained entry, the story had already told itself. What appeared on my screen was the kind of footage that has become the defining visual language of our time. Vertical, slightly shaky shot from shoulder height by someone in the third row who had made the decision that what they were witnessing was more important than anyone's request for discretion. The anchor introduced it as unverified social media content. That was technically accurate. It was also the clearest picture of the inside of Columbus Grand's main hall that anyone outside that room was going to get for the next several hours, and every local station in central Ohio had it on their feed within 4 minutes of it first appearing online. I turned the volume up until I could hear it properly and leaned forward with my elbows on my knees. The hall was beautiful. I will say that because it was true, and because truth does not stop being true, because the circumstances around it are ugly. The chandeliers caught the morning light coming through the high windows and scattered it across 200 white chairs, occupied by 200 people in their best clothes, and the floral archway at the front of the room was exactly the extravagant excess that Ethan had described to Derek as the centerpiece of the image he was building. For approximately 40 seconds watching that footage, you could believe the day was going to be what it had been advertised as. Then Claire walked in. She came through the main doors without her father, without her mother, without a bridesmaid at her elbow guiding her pace. She walked down the center aisle of Columbus Grand, the way someone walks when they have decided something, and the decision has made them very calm and very clear and slightly frightening to anyone paying close enough attention. The string quartet was playing. She did not appear to hear it. Ethan was standing at the front of the room beside the officiant, a gray-haired man in a dark suit who was holding a leather-bound book, and whose expression I noticed, even through the shaky footage, had already begun its transition from ceremonial warmth to professional concern. Ethan watched Claire come toward him, and I could see, even at this distance and this resolution, the moment he understood that something was wrong. His chin lifted slightly, his shoulders pulled back. The smile he produced was a half-second late. Claire stopped 6 feet in front of him. Not at the altar, 6 feet away in the aisle where the whole room could see her face. "Ethan," she said. The officiant's lapel microphone was live. The sound system carried her voice to every corner of that room with the clean, merciless clarity of professional audio equipment, doing exactly what it was designed to do. 200 people stopped breathing at the same time. "I need to ask you something," Claire said. Her voice was steady in a way that I recognized from what she had told me about the bathroom mirror, the steadiness of a decision already made, not the steadiness of someone holding themselves together. In front of everyone here, Ethan's half-second smile disappeared. Claire. His voice was lower, meant to be private, picked up anyway by the microphone with complete impartiality. This isn't the time. But a man called me this morning, Claire said at the same volume to the same microphone to the same 200 people. He was looking for you. He said you owe his firm $23,000. He said it's been 3 months. The sound that moved through the room was not a gasp. It was more like the sound of 200 people simultaneously recalibrating, a collective shift in posture and breath and attention that the footage captured as a kind of ambient rumble beneath Claire's voice. Ethan stepped toward her. We can talk about this privately. After you told me your family had resources, Claire continued as though he had not spoken. You showed me portfolios. You took me to dinner at places where the wine cost more than my first car payment. You told my mother that marrying you would be the best financial decision I ever made. She tilted her head very slightly. Was any of that true? Ethan's jaw tightened. The arithmetic was running behind his eyes. I knew that look. I had seen it across my own kitchen counter, and I could see the exact moment he decided that attack was the only remaining option available to him. Your family is hardly in a position to question anyone's finances, he said, his voice rising now the microphone carrying it all. Your mother came to me. Your mother told me what your company owes. Your mother is the one who decided this marriage was the solution to a problem she created. So before you stand up here and perform your little moment of moral clarity, maybe ask her what she promised me. The hall erupted. Not loudly, not all at once. It was more like the controlled explosion of a building being demolished, the sequential collapse of load-bearing structures, as each person in the room processed what they had just heard and turned to the person beside them to confirm they had heard it too. Margaret Whitfield, whom the footage caught in the second row, rose from her chair with the expression of a woman who has spent 40 years managing difficult situations and has just encountered the first one she cannot manage. Ethan, she said sharply, moving toward the aisle. Don't! Ethan pointed at her with the flat, furious gesture of a man who has run out of performance and is operating on pure adrenaline. You told me she was inheriting property. You told me the company debt was manageable. You made a deal with me, Margaret, so do not stand there in your $4,000 dress and pretend you are surprised by any of this. Margaret Whitfield stopped walking. Her face did something complicated that the footage was not quite good enough to fully capture, but that I understood perfectly when Claire described it to me later. It was the face of a woman watching the story she had told herself about herself collapse in real time in front of 200 witnesses. Claire had not moved. She was still standing 6 feet from the altar in her dress, with her hands at her sides, watching the two of them with an expression of such precise, exhausted clarity that even through a shaky smartphone video on a 24-inch television screen in a living room in Denton, Ohio, I felt the full weight of it. She looked, I thought, like someone who had just put down something very heavy that she had been carrying for a very long time. The officiant cleared his throat into his microphone. Perhaps we might take a brief recess. No, Ethan said, turning back to Claire, his voice cracking at the upper register with the particular strain of someone who has been maintaining a performance for so long that the muscles required have simply given out. No recess. You want the truth, Claire? Fine. My family trust has been empty for 10 years. Every property, every portfolio, every number I showed you, I built that presentation from public real estate listings and my friend's corporate letterhead. I have $3,800 in a checking account and $60,000 in credit card debt, And I needed this marriage to work because your grandfather's house was the only exit I could see. The hall went silent. Not the polite silence of ceremony, the deep, absolute silence of 200 people understanding something simultaneously. Claire looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then she reached up with her right hand and removed the diamond engagement ring from her finger. She held it for 1 second, feeling its weight. Then she placed it carefully on the white linen runner at her feet in the center of the aisle where everyone could see it. She straightened up. "I don't have a grandfather's house," she said quietly. "My grandfather died without a will. There is no inheritance, there never was." The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted them sitting in my living room in Denton with my cold tea on the side table and the television turned up loud enough that I could hear the ambient sound of 200 people not breathing. 4 seconds of absolute quiet in a room full of chandeliers and white flowers and the wreckage of a very expensive lie. And then Ethan Grayson opened his mouth and made everything considerably worse. "There is no inheritance." He repeated his voice stripped of everything except disbelief. He said it the way a man says something when his mind has received information that his understanding of the world cannot yet accommodate. "What do you mean there is no inheritance? Your grandfather owned property in—" "My grandfather owned a house in Akron that went to the bank when he died," Claire said. Her voice had not changed in register or pace since she walked through those doors. It had the quality of something that has been decided rather than felt, and it was, I thought, the most controlled and frightening thing I had heard all week. "He died intestate. That means without a will. The estate covered his debts, and there was nothing left. My mother told you there was property because she needed you to believe it, the same way you told her you had a trust fund because you needed her to believe that." A sound moved through the 200 guests that was not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur, but something between the two. The sound of collective understanding arriving all at once in a room that had been built to hold celebration. Ethan took 1 step toward Claire. His hands came up, not raised, not threatening, just the involuntary gesture of a man whose body is trying to express something his words have failed to convey. "You cannot just I planned everything around—" "I know what you planned," Claire said. Those 4 words hit the microphone and the sound system, and the 200 guests and the shaky vertical video being live-streamed to 1,100 viewers who had stumbled across it on social media and were now in the way of the internet summoning 11,000 more. "I know what you planned." 4 words that contained everything: the creditor's phone call, the cracked phone screen, the messages to Derek. The line about it being almost sad that she thought he loved her. Ethan's face did something then that I had never seen it do in 31 years. It lost its architecture. The careful construction of confidence and charm and forward momentum that he had been maintaining since he was old enough to understand that charm was a currency, all of it fell away at once. And what was underneath was something rawer and smaller and genuinely frightened. He looked for just a moment like a boy who has broken something irreplaceable and knows it, and has no idea what to do with that knowledge. Then Margaret Whitfield stood up from the second row. She moved into the aisle with the authority of a woman accustomed to managing situations by inserting herself into their center. Her $4,000 dress immaculate, her posture, the product of decades of presenting a version of herself that the world would find acceptable. "That is enough," she said loudly, addressing the room rather than any individual in it. "This is a private family matter, and I think we all need to take a moment." "Mom!" Claire turned to look at her mother, and the look was quieter and more final than anything she had said into the microphone. "Sit down." Margaret Whitfield sat down. Ethan looked at Claire. He looked at the ring on the white linen runner between them. He looked at the 200 people who were looking at him. And something in the combination of those three things, the ring, the faces, the specific quality of silence that only exists when a room full of people are watching, a man understand the full dimensions of what he has done, broke through whatever was left of his composure. "Everything I told you was what you wanted to hear," he said. His voice was quiet now, the microphone barely catching it, which meant the room was very quiet too. "You wanted someone who had money and a family name and a future that looked a certain way. Your mother wanted that. You wanted that. Don't stand there and act like you weren't also making a calculation." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Her right hand moved to the small bouquet she was still holding. White roses, tight-budded, the kind that looked like they were chosen by someone who cared more about appearance than fragrance. "The difference," she said, "is that I was calculating whether you were someone I could love. You were calculating whether I was someone you could use." She pulled back her right arm and threw the bouquet directly at his face. It was not a gentle toss. It was the throw of a woman who had been lied to for 14 months and had just that morning read the proof of it in her fiancé's own words on his own phone, and it connected with the side of Ethan's face with a sharp, audible impact that the lapel microphone picked up with complete fidelity, a sound like a book closing definitive and final. The bouquet burst apart on contact. White roses scattered across the altar, across the white linen runner, across the ring that was still lying where Claire had placed it. Petals drifted down onto Ethan's tuxedo jacket and into his hair and onto the floor around his feet like the world's most expensive confetti. Ethan's hand came up to his face. He touched the place where the bouquet had struck. He looked at his hand. He looked at Claire. Every phone in the room was up now. The vertical video that had been streaming to 11,000 people was now being screen-recorded and clipped and re-uploaded by people who understood instinctively that they were watching the kind of moment that does not stay in one room. The anchor on my television said, her voice carrying genuine human astonishment beneath the professional veneer. "We are getting reports that we are watching what appears to be a significant incident at the altar." I picked up my mug. Empty. I had forgotten it was empty. On the screen, Ethan was still standing at the altar, surrounded by white rose petals, and Claire had taken 3 steps back from him, and the 200 guests were on their feet, and somewhere in the second row, Margaret Whitfield had covered her face with both hands, and the lapel microphone was picking up the sound of the room coming apart at every seam simultaneously. My phone buzzed on the side table. An unknown number. It buzzed twice, 3 times. I set the empty mug down and picked up the phone. A pause. Then a voice I recognized from the steakhouse dinner, careful, composed, the voice of a woman who had learned very young that composure was a form of protection. But underneath it now was something raw that the steakhouse version of Claire Whitfield had not allowed anyone to hear. "Mr. Grayson." Her voice broke slightly on the second word, and she stopped, and I heard her pull in a breath, the way people do when they are holding themselves together through sheer mechanical effort. "This is Claire. Claire Whitfield. I'm sorry to call you out of nowhere. I got your number from it, doesn't matter how I got it. I needed to call you. I should have called you a long time ago." I turned the television down with the remote. On the screen, the coverage continued without sound. Aerial footage, now a news helicopter above Columbus Grand, the parking lot visible below with clusters of formally dressed people standing in the October sunlight looking at their phones. "Claire," I said, "take your time." She took a breath. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Grayson. I owe you a significant apology, and I don't know if it's enough, but I need to say it anyway." Another breath, steadier this time. "Ethan told my family that you had experienced some kind of breakdown, that you weren't stable, that he had been managing your situation for years, and that it was better for everyone, including you, if you weren't involved in the wedding or in any family events going forward." I sat very still with the phone against my ear. He said it with so much patience. Claire continued, and the word came out with a bitterness that she didn't try to hide. Like he was this devoted son carrying this sad burden, and we all just accepted it because it fit the story we wanted to believe. My mother never questioned it. I never questioned it. Her voice tightened. I should have questioned it. I should have asked to meet you before the engagement. I should have done 100 things differently. But I believed him because I wanted to believe him, and that is on me. Outside my window, the cardinal was on the fence post again. Same post, same bird, the same patient occupation of a space it had decided was its own. You don't need to apologize for believing someone you loved, I said. I should have verified what I believed. Her voice was firm on this, the way people are firm when they have been thinking something through and have arrived at a conclusion they intend to keep. That's different from believing. I believed without verifying, and people got hurt because of it. You got hurt because of it. I thought about what to say to that. I thought about the dinner at Brennan's, the envelope, the 2 sheets of paper I had carried in my breast pocket, over my heart. I thought about sitting in a parking garage for 22 minutes reading a letter that told me my son had calculated my worth and found it insufficient. I thought about the photograph on the kitchen table and the question I had asked the empty room at midnight. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Of course. The line in his messages. The one about it being almost sad that you thought he loved you. I paused. Did you read that before today or after? A silence. Then, before. I read it in the bridal suite this morning. I read it at 9:50. And I know the exact time because I looked at the clock right after, the way you do when something happens that you know you're going to remember. Her voice dropped. I stood in the bathroom for 7 minutes after that. I ran cold water over my wrists because my grandmother taught me that's what you do when you need to think clearly in a hurry. And then I went out and put on the dress. You put on the dress after you read that. I put on the dress, she said, because I had decided that if I was going to end this, I was going to end it where he started it, in front of everyone he had performed for, with the same microphone he had used to make his toasts and his promises. A pause. Was that wrong of me? I looked at the television. The muted footage was showing a close-up of the white rose petals still scattered across the altar steps of Columbus Grand's main hall, caught by a camera that had finally gained access to the interior. Petals across the stone, across the white linen around the diamond ring that was still lying exactly where Claire had placed it. No, I said. That wasn't wrong. She was quiet for a moment. I heard her swallow. How are you doing, Mr. Grayson, after everything? How are you actually doing? The question surprised me. Not because it was unexpected from a person with good manners, but because of the genuine quality of it. The way she asked it, as though my answer mattered, as though she had space in this particular afternoon, after everything that had happened to her in the last 3 hours, to be concerned about an old man in Denton she had met once over a steak dinner. I'm all right, I said, and then because she deserved the fuller answer. I've been all right for longer than people gave me credit for. I just had to figure out how to stop waiting for something that wasn't coming. Your son, she said quietly. The version of my son I remembered, I said. There's a difference. I think I was waiting for a person who stopped existing a long time ago. Maybe never existed the way I remembered him. I'm still working out which one it is. Claire didn't say anything for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, and I understood she was asking something she had been building toward since the beginning of the call. Did you know before all of this? Did you know what he was planning? I thought about the kitchen table at 7:43 in the morning, the cracked phone screen, Ethan's voice coming through the speaker with the comfortable certainty of a man talking about a problem he had already solved. "Yes," I said. I knew. Another silence. Longer this time. "Why didn't you warn anyone?" I looked at the drawer in the kitchen, where the manila envelope from Marcus Webb's office had sat for 4 days. I looked at the photograph of Ethan at 6 years old that was still on the kitchen table where I had left it at midnight. "Because I wasn't protecting anyone from him," I said. "I was protecting him from himself for 30 years. And a few weeks ago, I finally understood that I had to stop. That the only way any of this could end was if I let it end on its own." I paused. Some things you can fix, and some things you just have to let run their course. Claire was quiet for a long time. Outside, the cardinal lifted off the fence post and was gone. "Mr. Grayson," she said finally, "I think you are a considerably more complicated man than your son gave you credit for." "He didn't give me much credit for anything," I said. "No," she said. "He didn't." We were both quiet for a moment, sharing the particular silence of two people who have been connected by someone else's damage and are trying to figure out what that makes them to each other. "Claire," I said. "I'm sorry too. For what it's worth." "It's worth something," she said. "It's worth quite a lot, actually." She said goodbye. I said goodbye. The call ended, and I sat with the phone in my lap and the muted television in front of me, and the empty mug on the side table, and the afternoon light coming through the window at the particular low October angle that turns everything it touches a specific shade of gold that I have never been able to name but have always recognized. I opened the drawer beside my chair and took out the photograph of Ethan at 6 years old. I held it for a long time. Then I placed it face up on the side table beside the empty mug where I could see it. Two things side by side, the past and the present. What was and what is. I sat with both of them in the October light and did not try to make them into the same thing. The television was still on. I had forgotten to turn it off after the call ended, and now it was showing the afternoon local news, a proper broadcast. Now not citizen footage with a composed anchor at a desk and a chyron scrolling beneath her that read, "Columbus wedding ceremony ends in confrontation." Shum identified as Ethan Grayson, 31 of Columbus. Behind the anchor, a still image taken from the viral footage showed the interior of Columbus Grand's main hall, the scattered white rose petals across the altar, steps, the ring lying on the white linen runner like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I reached over and turned the television off. The room went quiet in a way that rooms do when a sound source that has been running for a long time is suddenly removed. Not just quiet, but a kind of resonant emptiness that takes a moment to settle. The afternoon light came through the front window at its October angle, long and gold, laying itself across the floor in a rectangle that reached almost to my chair. I picked up the photograph from the side table. Ethan at 6 years old. First day of kindergarten at Denton Elementary, September of 1998. I had taken the picture myself with a disposable camera. We still used disposable cameras, then still took them to the drugstore and waited 3 days for the prints still held the physical photographs in our hands and felt the particular weight of a moment that had been made permanent. In the photograph, Ethan is standing in front of the school's main entrance wearing a blue backpack that is visibly too large for his frame, the top of it reaching past his shoulder blades, the bottom of it bumping against the backs of his knees. He is grinning with the full, unguarded commitment of a child who has not yet learned that some expressions are safer kept private. I remembered the morning clearly. Margaret had made pancakes, blueberry his favorite, and he had eaten 3 of them at the kitchen table while wearing the backpack already refusing to take it off even to eat because putting it on had taken considerable effort, and he was not confident he could replicate the process. He kept reaching back to touch the straps the way you touch something new that you are not yet sure belongs to you. At the school gate, he had stopped walking and turned around and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before, and have not seen since something between excitement and genuine fear, the look of a person standing at the edge of something larger than themselves and understanding it for the first time. "Dad," he had said, "what if I don't know anybody?" "You will by lunchtime," I had told him. "You've never met a stranger, Ethan. It's one of the best things about you." He had thought about that for a moment. Then he had nodded with the serious deliberateness of a 6-year-old processing information that matters and turned back toward the school. He had walked through those doors without looking back, which was exactly the right thing to do. And I had stood at the gate for 10 minutes after he disappeared because I could not make myself leave yet. I sat in my living room in the October afternoon holding that photograph, and I let myself feel the full weight of what it contained. Not just the image, the boy, the backpack, the grin, but everything that had come after it. Every year of school lunches packed in the kitchen at 6 in the morning. Every baseball game where I sat in the bleachers in whatever I had on from work because there was no time to change. Every fever tended in the night, every homework crisis, every argument about curfews and car keys and the particular freedoms that teenagers believe they have already earned. Every Christmas morning, every birthday cake. 31 years of a life I had built around a person who had looked at that life and decided it was not worth the space it occupied in his narrative. The grief of it hit me then, not as a sudden thing, but as something that had been waiting patiently at a slight distance, and had simply decided that now in this quiet room with the television off and the phone call ended, and the October light lying across the floor was the appropriate time to arrive. It was not the sharp grief of sudden loss. It was the slower, heavier grief of a thing that has been dying for a long time and has finally finished. I did not try to stop it. I had learned after Margaret died that grief resisted is grief prolonged, and that the only honest thing to do with it was to let it move through you at its own pace and trust that it would pass, not because the loss became smaller, but because you became large enough to carry it without it carrying you. So I sat in my chair and I held my son's photograph, and I grieved the boy in the blue backpack who had wanted to know what would happen if he didn't know anybody, and I grieved the man he had become, and I grieved the distance between those two people that I had never found a way to cross, no matter how many times I had tried. After a while, I don't know exactly how long the light had shifted. By the time I came back to myself, I became aware that I was not alone. I looked up. Dorothy was standing in my front doorway. She had not knocked, or if she had, I had not heard it. She was still wearing the good blue cardigan from this morning, and she was holding nothing, no tea, no food, no practical offering. Just herself, standing in the doorway of my house, the way she had been standing in the doorway of my life for 20-some years, present and quiet, and entirely without agenda. She looked at me. She looked at the photograph in my hands. She looked at my face, which I imagined told her everything she needed to know about what the last hour had contained. She did not say she was sorry. She did not ask if I was all right. She did not offer a platitude or a remedy or a reframing. She came inside, crossed the living room, and sat down in the chair beside mine, the chair that had been Margaret's chair, the chair that had been empty for 4 years, the chair that still held the particular impression of someone who had sat in it for a very long time and loved the people around her without condition or calculation. Dorothy sat in it, the way you sit in a space that belongs to someone else, but that you have been invited into with the careful respect of a person who understands the difference between occupying something and honoring it. She reached over and put her hand over mine on the armrest. The same hand, the same gesture as the night before on the porch. Her hand was warm and dry and smaller than I remembered, and it pressed down on mine with the gentle, steady weight of someone who intended to stay. We sat like that, while the October light moved across the floor and the room breathed around us, and outside on the fence post. The cardinal came back one more time and sat without moving, its red so vivid against the gray afternoon that it looked almost painted there. Almost deliberate, almost like something that had been placed exactly where it was for a reason that neither of us needed to name. After a while, Dorothy said, "Do you want to turn the television back on?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said. "I think I do." I reached for the remote. The screen came back to the afternoon news broadcast, which had expanded its coverage considerably in the hour since I had turned it off. What had begun as a local story about a disrupted wedding ceremony had, in the way of things that capture a particular kind of collective attention, become something considerably larger. The anchor was now joined by a second commentator, a family therapist brought in to provide context, and the Chiron had been updated to include a view count for the original smartphone video, 4.7 million, a number that was visibly climbing as I watched. "A good Lord," Dorothy said, reading the number. "That's what happens now," I said. "When something goes wrong in front of a camera." She made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, but somewhere between the two, the sound of a 70-year-old woman processing a world that had changed faster than anyone had asked it to. She had not moved from Margaret's chair. I had not asked her to. The coverage had shifted to a segment on Ethan specifically. A reporter standing outside Columbus Grand, a different one from this morning. The evening crew now was describing what she called the financial irregularities that had come to light during the ceremony. She was careful with her language, the way journalists are careful when lawyers are watching, but the substance was clear enough. A groom who had represented himself as financially established. A ceremony that had collapsed when payment obligations could not be met. Vendors who were speaking anonymously to confirm that final invoices remained outstanding. "He's going to see all of this," Dorothy said. Not a question. "Yes. And he's going to blame you." I had not thought about this specifically, but the moment she said it, I understood it was true, with the same bone-deep certainty that comes from knowing a person for 31 years. Ethan would look at this wreckage, and he would trace the geometry of it backward until he arrived at a cause he could live with, and the cause he could live with would be me. The father who had refused to sign. The father who had not warned him. The father who had sat in a house in Denton, Ohio, and watched and done nothing and let it happen. Probably," I said. Dorothy turned to look at me directly. "Does that bother you?" I sat with this question. Outside, the street was getting dark in the particular way of October evenings, the light failing quickly once it decided to go, the neighborhood settling into its nighttime sounds, a garage door, somewhere a dog. The distant sound of a television through a neighbor's window. "It did once," I said. Worrying about what Ethan thought of me. I spent a long time trying to make decisions he would understand, or at least not resent. And then I realized that the decisions he respected were the ones where I gave him what he wanted, and the decisions he resented were the ones where I didn't, and that told me something important about the kind of respect it was. Dorothy nodded slowly. She had the look she got when she was filing something away, not for later discussion, but for permanent keeping, the look of a woman who had been collecting other people's hard-won wisdom for 70 years and knew which pieces were worth the space. On the television, the coverage cut to a brief clip of Ethan being escorted from the side entrance of Columbus Grand by 2 uniformed officers. He was still in his tuxedo, The jacket slightly disheveled, his hair no longer the careful arrangement it had been at the beginning of the day. He was talking to the officers, his hands moving with the urgent expressiveness of a man explaining something he believes can still be explained his way. One of the officers said something. Ethan's hands stopped moving. "So that poor boy," Dorothy said. I looked at her. She was watching the screen with an expression that surprised me. Not the satisfaction I had half expected. Not the vindication that might have been understandable from a woman he had borrowed $800 from under false pretenses. She looked genuinely sad. The particular sadness of someone watching a waste. "Dorothy," I said. "I know," she said. "I know what he did. I know all of it. He is still your boy, Walter. He is still the kid who used to climb your fence to retrieve a ball that went over and then stay for an hour because he didn't want to go back inside." She shook her head. "I don't know what happened to that boy, but I'm allowed to be sad that he's gone." I did not say anything for a moment. Then, so am I. We watched the coverage for another hour. The family therapist said several things about financial deception in relationships that were accurate, but that I did not need to hear explained. The anchor interviewed a wedding planner who said this kind of thing was more common than people realized, and that couples should always conduct independent financial verification before marriage, which was good advice that had arrived approximately 14 months too late for everyone involved. At some point, Dorothy got up and went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of chamomile tea, which I had not asked for, and which were exactly what was needed, and she settled back into Margaret's chair with the ease of someone who had decided she was staying for the duration. "Your wife would have had something to say about all of this," Dorothy said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "She would have had something to say about all of it a long time ago," I said. "Probably before any of it got to this point." "Probably," Dorothy agreed. "She was the smartest person on this street by a significant margin, and we all knew it." "She knew it too," I said. "She was just too kind to make it obvious," Dorothy laughed. The same laugh as last night, short and warm and belonging entirely to front porches and kitchen tables, and the particular comfort of people who have known each other long enough to laugh about the people they loved. It loosened something in my chest that had been tight all day. "I need to tell you something," Dorothy said when the laugh had settled. She was looking at her tea. "I called your number this afternoon before you called me, after I saw the news. I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I almost called. And then I thought he needs to sit with this himself first. He will call when he is ready." So I waited. "And then you came over anyway," I said. "I waited 45 minutes, she said with some dignity. "That is practically an eternity by my standards." I smiled. First time all day. It felt strange on my face, like a muscle that had been held in one position for too long, being asked to do something different. And then it felt entirely natural, and I held onto it for a moment because it seemed important not to let it go too quickly. The anchor on the television said Ethan Grayson had been released without charges following questioning and had declined to speak with media. Dorothy looked at the screen. Then she looked at me. "Thank you," I said, "for coming over, for staying." "Where else would I be?" she said. She looked back at the television. I looked at the photograph of Ethan still on the side table beside my empty mug. I looked at Margaret's chair, currently occupied by the woman who had stood in the doorway of my life for 20-some years, without ever once needing to be invited. Then I reached over and turned off the television. The room was quiet. The good kind. "Thank you, Lord," I said quietly to the ceiling. Just that. Just 3 words in the dark to the only other presence in the room that I was certain had been there for all of it. Dorothy heard me. She did not say anything. She just nodded once, the small, private nod of someone who understands exactly what you mean and does not require you to explain it. I woke at 5:53 again. Same time as yesterday, same gray light coming under the curtain, same dog 2 blocks over making his case for breakfast. Some things do not change because one day was significant. The body does not know the difference between an ordinary morning and the morning after everything fell apart. It simply continues, which is, I have come to understand, one of the more merciful things about having a body. I put the kettle on. I pulled on my work jeans and my old flannel shirt and carried my tea out to the garage. The Craftsman mower sat under its canvas tarp exactly where I had left it. I pulled the tarp off, folded it, set it on the shelf. I looked at the mower for a moment. Carburetor cleaned, fuel line, replaced, everything seated correctly. I had fixed it 2 days ago and confirmed the repair yesterday morning, and there was nothing left to do to it. So I just stood there in the garage with my tea and looked at it. My phone rang. Marcus. The new will is fully documented and protected, he said without preamble, the way Marcus talked, when the important thing was the information and not the packaging. Ethan's attorney made contact this morning. I told them what they needed to know. It's airtight, Walter. Thank you, Marcus, I said. That's what I'm here for. A pause. You doing all right? Yes, I said. I think I actually am. He said good and hung up, because Marcus Webb understood that sometimes good was exactly enough. I set the phone on the workbench. I looked around the garage, the tools on their pegboard hooks, each one in its place, the coffee can of salvaged screws, the single bulb swinging overhead, casting its familiar light across 40 years of accumulated purpose. Some things you can fix, I thought, and some things you simply have to let run their course and trust that the running has an end, and that on the other side of the end, there is still a morning and tea and a garage that smells like oil and sawdust and the particular quiet of a life that belongs entirely to you. I reached up and pulled the starter cord on the mower. It fired on the first pull, clean and steady, the way it had yesterday, the way it would tomorrow. I let it run. This grandpa story taught me the hardest lesson of my life. Silence is not always love. Sometimes it is fear wearing love's face. I stayed quiet for 30 years. I swallowed the hurt, bent myself into whatever shape my son needed, and called it patience. I was wrong. God sees everything we cannot, and what I believe now is this: He was not punishing my family that Saturday. He was simply letting the truth finish arriving. It had been on its way for a long time. If this family story found you at the right moment, hear me when I say this: do not do what I did. Do not wait 30 years to have the honest conversation. Do not confuse keeping the peace with keeping the relationship. The two are not the same thing, and one will eventually destroy the other. My personal opinion. A person who respects you will never need you to make yourself smaller to fit their story. These grandpa stories, these family stories, they are not just entertainment. They are mirrors. Look into them honestly. If something in this family story moved you, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story that matters. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements created for storytelling and reflection purposes. If that is not the content you are looking for, we completely respect your choice. Please feel free to explore other channels that better suit your interests.